everybody, it is Scott Schnars back with Edan Gottlieb for another episode of Lunch Money with Scott and Edan. And Edan, I gotta tell you, I have had a couple of interesting conversations this past week with consulting clients of mine, two of whom have said that they don't want to give software demos anymore. They're just flat out against giving demos. One of them even went so far as to say demos are now illegal, and he's got his journey mapped out now that just there's no software demo any longer, and you take a phone call and they ask you some questions and then you sign a contract, which I think is a great business if you can get it. But I want to talk to you about really the purpose of a demo. We've been selling software for a long time. I think that one of the things that's happening in the world right now is that when you and I first started our careers a million years ago, we were enterprise software salespeople and we were running an enterprise software play. And then when SaaS launched in the kind of late 90s, early 2000s, SaaS companies were still very enterprise focused back then and still brought in an enterprise sales process methodology to their table. Now you have companies that are becoming more and more product-led growth. They're becoming more and more tool set types of companies and not platform types of companies. And the question I have, and I think that the question for this episode of Lunch Money today is, do you even need a demo in your sales process? And is it important? Is it something that customers like? Do customers really want to see a demo? Do salespeople really want to give a demo, and what value does it actually bring to the table? We had a really interesting conversation leading up to this point about the importance of demos, and I see a lot of validation in not doing any demos, but I also think that it takes away from the overall sales process. So what are when you hear software demos are illegal, what is your immediate reaction to that? Knowing that maybe we're leaning towards dictatorship in this country anyway, to go, oh, software demos are illegal. What are your thoughts?
I think your question is spot on. Do you need a demo in your sales process? It's a super great question, and you outlined it correctly about PLG and demos and self-service and cost of sales and everything, get everything confused together. So I think the answer to do you need a demo in your sales process is yes and no, or depends, or kind of all of the above. I think it goes back to the question behind the demo, which is why do you do the demo in the first place? And I think on a high level,
that's how my ancestors in software did demos, so I'll just keep doing demos.
So what's the origin story of demo, where they came from? And so back at the olden days,
old men were showing how wheels work. They're pushing carts around and
just turns around. Oh,
brilliant thing!
Stop, brilliant, and it keeps turning. It's like
I'll take 4.
Yes, roll it over this side. But it's if you try to take a step up and look at it, there's different ways to utilize a sales demo or a demo. I think the original really was educational purpose, and I think that's where you see the friction and where you see the statements like demos are illegal or not allowed, and because you can cater to a lot of the educational purposes that demos did in the past today in a different way, because the dynamics have changed and people consume information differently, and the products themselves, when you have a PLG or you have a good enough product that could demo itself kind of thing, right? You could facilitate that educational process. But I'll preface it depends who you're educating, because you get different personas that you sell. So going back to your point, if it's a tool that you're selling or solving a specific set of features, and it's the individual consuming it that's going to need to go through it and get educated and buy it, then it's a very legitimate motion that you want to go through. But if it gets more sophisticated in terms of the types of buyers, or more complex because you have multiple buyers that everybody will experience it differently and you have to educate them differently, then you got to be thinking about it. Again, you can create a bunch of videos, create different things for each of them to consume differently, but you got to think about that.
It's hard to scale.
But that's the education.
Go ahead. So your point, and I think that it's very valid. If you are selling, I'll just use Riverside, this podcast platform that we have. We didn't see a demo of it. No software salesperson called us. We played around with a few of them and decided we liked this one best, and now we buy it.
And that was our educational process, right?
Yes.
We wanted to get educated. How does it work? Does it have these features? And it's you and me making that decision. And that's it. And we're doing it to get our task done. It's not like that I'm trying to make an impact. But if I'll be the CMO of Lunch Money Media, we'll get to become really, really big. And let's say we have, 150 employees now, and they all want to do different tools. that wouldn't be the way for Riverside to educate me that this is going to be a great tool for my people to generate results. They'll have to go a different route than me trying myself to create a podcast here and play with it.
Do you think one is one the number for that? Do you think like once it gets beyond one or maybe two people, you need to start really bringing in a team of people to assess how they're going to use this?
So I don't think it's necessarily the number of people that are buying it. I think it's more about what you're selling, right? Because if you're selling very specifically a tool for an individual or group to do, and this is their task, then that motion of educating them through, let them try it out and feel that it works, would be sufficient. Even if there's a bunch of them, right? Even, again, Lunch Money Media becoming really big and we have 100 creators, it's fine. We could say, all of you guys go try Riverside and tell me what you think, and we can rank stank it.
Yeah.
Because that would be the process that we're going to get to. When you start getting different types of personas, and when your solution has a broader impact, more than just a single task, let's call it a single task here, of recording a podcast, then you'll need to get more sophisticated. Now, again, you could add more lanes that are self-consumed, but you're going to have to start thinking about that and think about this as individuals, and then you'll get to a certain point that it's not about trying the product. It's about understanding its impact and how you get there.
So how would you...
But that's the educational track.
Yeah. Well, but that's really interesting because like one of the things that all kind of came out of the traditional enterprise software sales motion is this idea of doing discovery. And I think one of the things that you and I were talking about was, okay, is there a world where you combine some traditional discovery with traditional demo and create this new, call it stage in your sales process, demography or something like that. We'll make up words, but it's it's a demo and it's discovery all combined, and kind of covers all of your bases as a seller so that you understand the needs of your client and the value that you want to bring in a shorter amount of time.
And so that goes back to kind of, do you need a demo in your sales process, right? And it goes back to what's the purpose, right? So we talked about education as one. There are two other purposes that you could use demo as a tool to achieve in your sales process. Right, you talked about discovery is one of them, which is really a mechanism for you to have a conversation with your prospect. Just use the product to go through the motions in these areas and these topics versus say, oh, I got these 5 questions, now could you answer me and what's going on? And help and make it engaging and such that you could really understand their world through leveraging the product to do it. So that's the discovery mode. So you do the demo for not just to educate, but really to get the discovery. Another level, I don't know if it's above it in the hierarchy, but more sophisticated or complex one is about really mapping needs. So going through an exercise together of these are all really the situations that you are facing and they're mapped out really well. This is how they're going to be addressed one by one, and really walking them through that notions of mapping the needs. Now, it facilitates both you understanding what the needs are, them understanding how the needs are going to get addressed, and probably together you're able to build your business case of this is why it's worth doing beyond just, the feature works.
Yeah.
And so those are other layers of where you want to use the mechanism or the tool or the activity of a demo to really achieve something like a discovery or like needs mapping that are later or different in your sales process, rather than educating them of, oh, here's how the process does your work.
So one of the things that's frustrating to me from a demo standpoint, and I shared this with you when this happened back in October, was my wife went to buy another car. And she's bought the same car now 3 times in a row from the same guy at the same dealership. We've been in the Subaru family for 9 years. We get to the dealership and the guy's like, do you want to take a test drive? Let's go take a test drive. Come on, let's go drive it around the neighborhood a little bit. And my wife and I just looked at each other like, dude, we've been driving this car now for 6 years. Like, we don't need 7 years. We don't need another car. We don't need to drive around the block. Like, let's just sign the paperwork and get out of here. Here's a trade in, let's go. But you brought up a really interesting point about how that is not only an emotional trigger, but there also might be some compelling business reasons why that demo is important. And I wanted you to talk about, that emotional piece, but also the important piece as it kind of pertains to the overall business, as it relates to software sales professionals that are hopefully our audience here at Lunch Money.
Yeah, and it's funny you bring this because this is kind of the other side of the coin, right? So we talked about demo and it's important to educate and do discovery. So kind of things that are important for for us to do in the sales process. I think that the scenario you talked about and what happens with the car dealership as an example is they want you to go through that test drive because it's part of the sales journey that you have to go through. Now, you can skip that step and still have a purchase. But if you skip that step, you'll get to some of the later stages of negotiation in a different position that you were, other than, in this case, the emotional impact of like, oh, I really enjoy driving it. And it's not about trying to manipulate you or get you there or screw you up with the price later about it. It's really about the fact that every individual and every company has to go through their journey to start from I have a problem to I'm buying it. And you don't want to skip any steps of the journey. And skipping him, again, doesn't mean you won't have a deal. It means you'll have a compromise deal instead of ending up at the end point where it's optimal. This is exactly the value that we deliver, and this is exactly how we want to capture the value with our pricing, and this is exactly the experience you want to feel about, oh, I'm getting the price for my value. You won't reach it there in the same configurations if you didn't get the test drive. And it could be little things in terms of like, would you the terms you're going to end up negotiating for, what's your net payments. It doesn't have to be that your price will be even different, but if you skip that stage, you will enter the negotiation phase in a different feeling and a position in terms of how open and how you feel, which would makes it harder on the sales guy to really reach that optimal point of this is the value, this is how we price that value, this is how you feel great about this as a customer. And if something is missing, then it wouldn't be a great experience or a great outcome. Yeah. It's funny because it's a nuance that is so important about they have to go through. It doesn't mean that I say, okay, you have to do a demo in order for them to get there. It means you have to think about the journey your customers has to go through, and we'll talk about it probably in a different episode. And make sure that they don't skip any of the beats in the process, because it's not only that you risk not having a deal, you risk not having the optimal deal.
Yeah, so talk about that a little bit. Like, how does a demo then translate to optimal deal? And what are some things, maybe this is like something we can end this episode on, what are some things that as a sales leader, somebody should be looking at to constantly optimize both of those processes? One is optimize my journey. The other is, like, more importantly to this topic, like, how do I optimize my demo to ensure that I'm getting what I want out of it and the client is getting what they want out of it, and we both have this like optimal experience? Everybody gets optimization. I'm like, oh,
well, it's a big topic, and I'll try to stay. Yeah. Yes. Everybody at the. First, I think there's a deep dive we need to do it, but I'll say that, more of a high level comment about this one. You want to make sure that your sales process is 100% designed to support the buying journey that the customer has to go through. So whatever stages you got to make sure that what's happening there and what you're planning to do is there to support their journey. And that's the most critical thing. Now, I don't want to give software examples because I think there's so many variations, and maybe from the questions in the comments, we'll do maybe a follow-up Q&A on this one for people. But I'll stay with your example of the car, right? And the example of the car is that you taking the test drive created an emotional feeling about, oh, this is good. Yeah, it's the good old, you mentioned we like the car. It's the good old feeling of our car, just a new version of it. It's great. You'll enter that discussion later feeling like, this is good, and he's offering me a good deal, and whatever, elements that were important to them versus us and what's important. But we all come in there and feeling it's a good deal because it feels like this is a good fit. You would felt before like this is something I want, but not as good feeling as a good fit. And you need to think about it in your journey as well. What would get the customer to feel this is a really good fit? It's feeling really well. It feels natural. It feels good for me. That there's risk that they're trying to mitigate, especially as they get towards the end. On a high level, they're really trying to make sure that it's going to work and that they're going to be using it. But it's too superficial for what really we have to go through to talk about what needs to happen in the buying journey. But to your question, I think the critical thing for you, your sales process needs to think about every step they need to do and how do I make sure that they go through it. And don't skip any steps.
Yeah.
By the way, there's the other thing about, it makes the process longer. You can argue that if they skip steps could make the process longer. Again, I'll go to the car because it's generic enough. Not taking the test drive would add another half an hour, an hour of negotiations because you would try to squeeze this and you don't feel good about that. And just because of where you're at versus you stepping in feeling, this is a good feeling. I feel good about this. It's what we like. You enter in a very different mindset in a different position.
So your belief is that people should slow down to speed up and maybe not be so hasty to kill the demo, maybe to embrace the demo but optimize it.
I think optimization is probably, you're being Oprah and giving everybody optimization is probably the key behind this. And I think the people that are saying kill the demo are saying kill the educational piece of it, because if you just there's other ways, cheaper, better, and again, for certain populations, even a better way that they like to consume. We saw it to developers before, right? They would rather self-consume it. By the way, there's another discussion. They would rather self-consume it maybe from a third party so they could trust it. There's a whole set of how do I get that educational part more effective, but should all be mapped out to what they're trying to do. They didn't change how they buy. It's just changed. I don't know if how they buy. They didn't change the process or the steps they have to go through in order to buy something. How they go through the steps have changed because we now have different ways to do it, and different accepted kind of way of performance. Like I want to see a demo, or I want to try it by myself, or I want to see a video, or I want an influencer to say it's great, or whatever the combination is. But don't skip the steps. I think this is the most important. Make sure you have your prospects go through the entire journey. If they do, you guys enter the last step in the best place for all of you guys, and then that would also impact how it gets implemented and your long life relationship.
Yeah, and I think that's like, if there's any action item on this, like probably the most important one is I've got 2 books on my desk right now and countless others on my bookshelf all about how to build a great sales process. I have 1 book on how to build a good buyer process. And I think it's it's something that a lot of sales leaders tend to neglect is what does that buying process look like? And I think that the action item here for anybody, the important part of this is, as you're saying, let's look at the buying journey and try to accommodate that as much as possible while at the same time educating potential clients on value and different offerings that we have for different personas.
And you're absolutely right. And the problem with buyer journey, well, again, I said we'll probably have an episode about that separately because it got bastardized by 2 different groups in different ways. Sales took it in terms of like how does the paper process and how the actual purchasing is.
Yes.
And then marketing hijacked it towards, no, there's a whole journey that we need to cater to so you can count attribution for it. Again, not dinging marketing. I think it's very important, but this is kind of where it ended up. It's outside of sales or competing with sales, or is just the mechanical part of how do I get the purchase order. And you're right, this is where it goes back. It's like you have to connect to the buyer's journey, to the entire journey and understand all of it. By the way, it goes beyond the point of a purchase. It goes into getting to production and then be successful and then grow, and especially in a SaaS model.
Yeah.
But that's So the answer to the question is, do you need a demo in your sales process? The answer is yes, no, and it depends.
How about that for some action items right there?
Yeah, I know. I think on the action items, you're right. It's really look at it. Is it educational? Are you trying to get more things like discovery or needing map needings? Also, that's kind of the one thing of like, what is your purpose for it? On the other side is make sure you cater to all the steps that the buyer needs to go through their journey. It doesn't make it longer. If they skip steps, it makes it longer.
Awesome. Edan, been another fun episode. Always love chatting with you. Thank you very much for the time, and thank you very much everybody for taking the time to watch this. If you liked it, would love a subscribe or a like. As my favorite golfer on YouTube, Rick Shields, likes to say, smash that like button, or check out lunchmoney.media where you can see these videos and get our newsletter. Edan, thanks so much. Always good to see you again. Be good.
Always a pleasure.
Cheers, everyone.